Hey there. Are you curious about the mysteries of the extraordinary? Do you believe in near-death experiences, supernatural encounters, and other intriguing phenomena? If you do, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Strange Stories, where we dive into the captivating world of the unknown and uncover real-life accounts of these extraordinary events. From near-death experiences to supernatural encounters, we bring you the most intriguing stories from around the world. Imagine being able to escape the mundanity of everyday life and dive into a world of mystery and intrigue. Imagine being able to understand more about the experiences of those who've had a glimpse of the other side. Imagine being a part of a community of like-minded individuals who share your curiosity and desire to know more. Don't miss out on this opportunity to join us on this journey. Hit the subscribe button now and let us explore the strange and extraordinary together. And if you enjoy the content, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. See you on the other side. Story number 1. I'm a 52-year-old senior in Western Washington University's Human Services Baccalaureate program in Bellingham, Washington. Dr. Barbara Romer's Blessings in Disguise was recommended to me by a study group presentation in Loss, Grief, and Bereavement class. So many of my questions were answered in your book. Although I was aware that I'd experienced an NDE, I had no idea what had occurred or how profoundly it had affected my life. Now I know why I'm not afraid of death, why I'm not materialistic, and why I'm not accepting of people and situations. I hadn't been angry in a long time, and I couldn't figure out why. I assumed it was because I was sick. I'd like to say more, but this letter is already too long, and I'm sure you're busy. I wrote the following essay about 2 years after my NDE/LTP. Even a passing thought about the experience would trigger a severe panic response for an extended period of time. This was written for a college English 101 class. The assignment was to write about a significant personal event. Fortunately, the instructor was unfazed. I didn't make any changes to what I wrote for this class, but I did add a few notes. You only live once, when you're born, and once you face death. Ian Fleming wrote, "The most unusual way for humans to encounter death is to transcend through an afterlife experience. The majority of those who return to tell the story describe a long tunnel that leads to a bright and majestic light that illuminates, expands, and enlightens. This experience has a dark side that few survive, and it is only whispered about. I followed this dark path until I reached a fork in the road where life and horrible death collided. It was a momentous occasion, shrouded in spiritual mists. It heralded the return of life, a final chance to live among the living rather than languish among the undead. It was such a blessing to read Romer's book and discover that my experience was not unique. Understanding what happened to me has finally allowed me to be grateful for who I am, rather than fearful of being different. My journey began as a child of the 1950s, born to progressive parents for their time. I grew up in a world of beatniks, folk songs, art galleries, and social activism. An upbringing that was liberal and progressive should have prepared me to accept the hippie movement of the 1960s as a natural progression from my avant-garde beginnings. My twin brothers, 1 year younger than me, were raised in a healthy and balanced environment. I would have if I hadn't been born with a profoundly addictive personality. The devastation of my life was found in the free-flowing drug scene of the 1960s. Years passed, and then years after that. Marriages that began brightly and promisingly have ended in pain and confusion. Career goals faded over time, abandoning them in the face of failure and panic. Children were loved but forgotten. State to state and country to country, there are geographical shifts, always searching but never finding, but plagued by the specter of addiction. The lifestyle of a confirmed addict takes its toll. It's depressing to realize that I've outlived the vast majority of my contemporaries. All nightmares, unfortunately, must come to an end. After 30 years of use and abuse, I was an emaciated mental degenerate, spiritually demoralized, and lost in addiction. I was unemployed, unable to support myself, and disconnected from the present reality, and I had long since parted ways. I was alone and depressed in a room at an unnamed motel, preparing to escape reality once more with a massive chemical injection into a separate and secret world of magic and light. For several years, I'd been using lethal doses of cocaine as a trigger to move my spirit onto the astral plane. It was as if I were standing next to myself, watching as some part of me took control, injecting many times the intended amount. This was no accident, and I had no say in the matter. As I overdosed and killed myself, I stood there in shock and awe. Is it possible for the subconscious mind to kill itself? I hadn't made the deliberate decision to end my life. I hadn't performed the ritual of donating my prized possessions. I hadn't said those quiet goodbyes. I hadn't succumbed to the euphoria that comes with making the ultimate decision to commit suicide. I assumed I was just looking for a temporary reprieve from the agony of reality. However, a part of me was determined to die. Colors that were bright and fierce, whirling with craziness. A brutal severing, falling deeper and deeper into the abyss. In reality, there's no anchor. There was no way to communicate with the outside world. There's no way out, and there's no way back. Terror and impending doom. A vast and vast domain. Images that are morbid and twisted. Malevolent insanity. Malevolent insanity. I noticed the entity in the middle. We humans have an amazing system of checks and balances that protect us from recalling memories that are too intense and dangerous. Until recently, if my thoughts wandered to this period of my life, I would curl up in the fetal position, my eyes wide with terror. More information about this incident is thankfully still unavailable to me, with the exception of the following message delivered in a malicious tone. Fool! Years ago, I offered you power, prestige, and position. You could have enslaved, manipulated, and controlled people in my name. In your pitiful arrogance, you thought you could turn me down, but I've been stalking you all these years. You thought yourself on a quest for separate reality. This was my second, unexpected offer. You paid for the discomfort, but not the pleasure. Fool! You paid for the ruse. Without making any false promises, I had you accepting the quest that required you to sell your soul. All of you are mine. Your life has been taken. Note, I was standing there looking up at something that looked like the Balrog from the Lord of the Rings films. I briefly panicked when I saw that on the screen. I recall desolate resignation and complete hopelessness rather than fear. Was it a live recording or a memory? Was it a genuine spiritual experience or the ravings of a lunatic on drugs? This incident was brought back to mind by the entity's vicious reminder of a power offer turned down so long ago. I turned down that offer on the eye of my first marriage. I also picked up on the quest reference. Early in my addiction, I succumbed to the whole tune in, tune on, and drop out 60s drug mentality. The Berkeley Barb, Haight-Ashbury Oracle, and San Francisco Free Press showed me the way and gave me step-by-step instructions. The quest to transcend time and space and enter a separate reality had now been exposed as a lie. My 36-year chemistry journey to enlightenment was predestined to fail, on purpose. I was only left with an empty bag. I have no idea how long I was away from my body or how I managed to return. Note, a deal was made that allowed me to return to my body. Who made the deal and the specifics were not revealed to me. If I ever return, I know there will be no second chances. I awoke a day or two later, still alone in that motel room. After years of seemingly irreparable harm to my mind and body, chasing after something that was never there to begin with, I was completely depressed. What a waste. I wish I could say I never used drugs again, but I am a recovering addict. That is precisely what I do. However, the realization that my days were numbered and the end was approaching began to form. Or I'd die if I didn't figure out how to stop using drugs. If I died from my addiction, I'd be returning to that abyss. I could tell the entity wasn't happy about my escape. I also knew that no power within me could have resurrected me. It had to be a power bigger and stronger than me. I prayed to this power to help me find a way to live without using drugs. For so long, my body had been flooded with chemicals that I couldn't function without. Simple tasks such as bathing and brushing my teeth were challenging. Desperately, I stopped bombarding my system with massive doses of chemicals. In the hope that this would solve the problem, I stopped using needles. But I'd rock back and forth for hours, mouth open, drooling, and lost in hallucinations. I'd do just enough dope to close my mouth and maybe take a shower. The fantastical sights and sounds never stopped. I wasn't getting any better. I eventually made it down to the mental health, aided by my cane. I told them I was insane and asked if they could please give me some pills to restore normal brain function. After a thorough examination, they revealed the truth to me. I had reached the most severe stage of acute chemical dependency. I couldn't separate my mental illness from my addiction because my brain had been so damaged by drugs. I needed medical attention right away. I didn't have a lot of time. Mental Health pinned a note to my shirt and directed me down the street to an organization that could help me get into residential treatment. I knew that if it hadn't been for the intervention of a power greater than myself, I would never have been able to wade through all of the confusion and red tape involved in locating assistance. For an addict like me, a 3-month wait for treatment would be an eternity. I begged the God who had saved me from death to help me live long enough to learn how to stop using drugs. That simple prayer gradually lifted my obsession and compulsion to use drugs over the course of 3 months. I had been clean for 3 days by the time I arrived at the treatment center. I promised myself and this power that appeared to be willing to help me that I would do whatever it took to live a life free of addiction. What a power greater than myself did for me was what I couldn't do for myself, I realize now. I now realize I had a type 3 less than perfect near-death experience in abundance. Despite the fact that this happened over 7 years ago, I find it unsettling to delve too deeply into the incident. I've been sober for almost 6 years. The massive chemical infusions caused brain damage, making early recovery difficult. Because it made sense to me and resonated with my spirit, I read and reread books on American Indian spirituality. I still follow this path. I take each day as it comes, and I appreciate every day spent on the green side of the lawn. And I don't mind dying because it's just a transition between the worlds. I have consumed all of your time. These first steps towards understanding my NDE have assisted me in becoming more at peace with and accepting of myself. Story number 2. A profoundly moving and evocative experience. About 4 or 5 years ago, I developed a severe blood infection that went undiagnosed until I died. I was in critical condition because my illness had progressed to that point. I was terminally ill and had a strong sense of impending death and that I might be dying. There was nothing reassuring or peaceful about the experience because I was not prepared or willing to accept this outcome. I believe I had a near-death experience, but it was not as glamorous or transcendental as depicted in more glamorous and transcendental depictions. I recall lying in my hospital bed, feeling morbid and, to be honest, borderline deathly. I became defensive and determined against these feelings, refusing to give in emotionally or psychologically. I resisted, and it was a laborious process, a literal mental struggle to keep these foreboding feelings at bay. It was late at night, and I was worried about falling asleep, so the sensations that began seemed very real and completely out of my control. In full awareness, I began to drift into this non-sleep, non-dream-like state that was diametrically opposed to fully awake cognizance or reality. I vividly recall a sense of heightened awareness that what was happening to me was unexpected and unwelcome, and that I needed to resist with all my might in order to overcome if I could. As the saying goes, I was determined not to go down without a fight. These feelings, this altered consciousness, became more powerful, or to put it another way, more enveloping, and I had a very real, I remembered, feeling of separating from my body, just as other people had. I felt like I was floating above my body, able to see the surroundings of my hospital room, and slowly drifting towards the lighted doorway and ward hallway. In this state, I knew what was taking place and what was going to happen to me, and I resisted, and it took an immensely powerful psychological and emotional struggle against what was taking place. I was not prepared to die. I would not accept it. I was a single father with an 8-year-old son, and my death would have been disastrous. I had a feeling it was critical for me to get back into my body and awake in order to overcome, offset, and survive this ordeal. I struggled to resist the pull that was drawing me to the illuminated doorway. The lighted doorway was just that because the room was dark, because everyone was sleeping. It was late at night and the hall lights were on. They had nothing in common with previous report of bright lights and tunneling. There were no such sensations or feelings of euphoria at any point. I kept telling myself in very strong feelings that I needed to resist without fear or hesitation in order to survive. I began verbally stating my vehement opposition to what was pulling me and my determination to prevail. It was an undeniable realization that I needed to get back into my body and return to a normal cognitive reality if I wasn't going to die. I can't say asleep or awaken because these states and terminology didn't describe the state, the reality that I was in and experiencing, which was intensely real. Everything seemed to move slowly but steadily, and my forward progress seemed to be halted by some unknown force during my struggles. I'm not sure if it was my struggles or my reluctance to give in to the process I was experiencing, or whatever that stopped the process for whatever reason is. But the next thing I knew, I was back in my body and wide awake at the exact moment my forward motion progress had stopped, in a way. For a brief moment, I was in a completely foreign state of consciousness. I knew I'd returned to my body, but my spirit, being, and non-physical composition seemed to be out of sync with my physical body. My body, mind, and spirit all seemed to be out of sync and needed to be re-engaged to become whole again. I was completely back in control and beside myself as soon as everything seemed to have tuned. I was aware of what I'd just witnessed, but I was not prepared to accept it, and I knew that what I had witnessed was very real and had actually occurred. What I'm not sure about is whether my struggles caused my return to my physical body or whether I was allowed to return by an unknown entity. My struggles, I believe, demonstrated that I was neither prepared nor willing to participate in what was going on, and the process was thus allowed to halt. I can tell you unequivocally that the process is genuine, and I can tell you that I've never been the same since. It had a profound effect on how I perceive the experience of life and its transient nature, and I don't feel fully recovered from the experience in a clinical sense, that it had a definite medical effect on my capacities. This was an extremely moving and evocative experience. There was nothing surreal or subjective about what occurred. It is simply a part of and a fact of existence, for what it's worth.